Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Lancaster Safety's Webinar Wednesdays. Each month, we host a free safety and health webinar as part of our goal of getting workers home safely each day. Today's topic is the anatomy of a safety data sheet. If you've ever worked with hazardous chemicals in any industry, whether it's manufacturing, construction, healthcare, or maintenance, you've probably seen a safety data sheet, or SDS. But do you really know how to read and use one effectively? This is a topic that our safety professionals see companies overlooking on a regular basis. And in order to help change that, today we'll be breaking down the different parts of an SDS in an easier to understand way. Before we get started, let's take care of a few quick housekeeping items. If you do have any questions during the webinar, feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll address them as we go. You will also receive a recording of today's session via an email later this week. Before we dive in, let me introduce myself. My name's Emily, and I'm an online training lead, and I've been with Lancaster Safety for over 8 years. We work with businesses like yours to ensure compliance with OSHA regulations and help create safer workplaces for everyone. Lancaster Safety is an award-winning nationwide OSHA compliance firm. We provide training on-site, online, and remotely. We also offer additional OSHA compliant services such as customized safety programs, workplace inspections, and consulting services to create safer work environments. All right, enough about us. Let's talk about what we can help you with today. Today, we're going to break down the structure of an SDS so that you can find critical information fast. Explain why they're required and which products need them. Clear up common misconceptions, like the difference between MSDS and SDS. Provide practical tips for managing and maintaining SDS logs in your workplace. By the end of this webinar, you'll have a better understanding of how SDSs keep you and your team safe, compliant, and prepared for emergencies. All right, let's get started. First up, let's talk about what exactly an SDS is and why it matters. Like we said, SDS stands for a safety data sheet, and this is like an instruction manual for chemicals. It tells you everything you need to know about a chemical product, what it is, what dangers it might have, and how to use it safely. So think of it as a cheat sheet for chemical safety. It helps workers to understand what's in the product they're working with, how it can affect their health, how to handle and store it properly, and what to do in an emergency like a spill or accidental exposure. Businesses are required by OSHA, which is the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, to have SDSs available for any hazardous chemicals that they use. This way, employees can quickly find important safety information and avoid dangerous situations. Most safety data sheets follow a 16-section format thanks to OSHA and the globally harmonized system. Here are the most important parts: chemical composition, physical, health, and environmental hazards, protective measures, and safety precautions for handling, storing, and transporting chemicals. We'll go over those more in depth soon. Now, this is a really important point to keep in mind. The majority of health hazards in the workplace are chemical hazards, and these could include physical characteristics, routes of entry into the body, health effects, and obtaining information about these hazards using safety data sheets. When hazardous substances enter the body, they do so through one of the 4 main routes: inhalation, ingestion, absorption, or injection. Inhalation is the most common route of exposure, occurring when harmful particles, gases, or vapors are breathed into the lungs. This can lead to respiratory issues and systemic effects. Ingestion happens when toxic substances enter the body through eating, drinking, or accidental hand-to-mouth contact. Proper hygiene and workplace safety measures help minimize this risk. So think of the employee break room. How often may employees rush in for lunch and don't think to properly wash their hands? Absorption occurs when chemicals pass through the skin or eyes, potentially leading to local irritation or systemic toxicity. Protective clothing and gloves are essential in preventing this. Injection is the least common but most direct route, where hazardous materials enter through punctures, cuts, or needle sticks, rapidly introducing substances into the bloodstream. Understanding these routes helps us take the right precautions, such as using personal protective equipment and following safe work practices to minimize these exposure risks. Take a look at these pictograms and see if you recognize any of them. These are all common graphic symbols used on safety data sheets and chemical labels to quickly show specific hazards to each substance. They provide a visual representation of hazards, making it easier to identify potential risks. Each pictogram represents a specific category of hazard, including physical hazards such as flammability, health hazards such as carcinogenicity, and environmental hazards such as aquatic toxicity. OSHA requires the use of GHS pictograms on SDSs and labels to enhance workplace safety. In addition to pictograms being required, they also help workers take necessary precautions when handling chemicals and support risk assessment and proper personal protective equipment selection. Now remember this, by recognizing these pictograms on the SDS and labels, employees can better protect themselves and their work environment from hazardous substances. All right, let's pause for a quick Insta Safety poll. This is an easy one. True or false? Ingestion is the primary route of entry for hazardous chemicals. You can put your answer down below in the little tab labeled with a question mark. All right, so I'm seeing the answers roll in, and the correct answer is false. Inhalation is actually the primary route of entry. Now, although there is no specified format for the SDS, OSHA does require that certain essential information be included on it. Each safety data sheet must be in English and include information regarding the specific chemical identity of the hazardous chemical involved and the common names. In addition, information must be provided on the physical and chemical characteristics of the hazardous chemical, known acute and chronic health effects, exposure limits, recommended protective measures, emergency and first aid procedures, and lastly, identification information of the organization responsible for preparing the sheet, such as their name, address, and telephone number. Ensuring that employees have access to up-to-date safety data sheets helps to promote workplace safety and regulatory compliance. If you don't have a background in safety and this information looks a little bit confusing to you, we'd like to point out a few sections to focus on. Section number 2 is hazard identification, and this section outlines the potential health effects of the chemical, including which organs it may impact and the consequences of exposure. Number 4, 5, and 6, these are sections that provide essential guidance for handling first aid incidents, small fires, or accidental releases. And number 7 details proper storage and handling practices. So for instance, chemicals should not be stored alongside food, flammable substances should be kept away from oxidizers, and no smoking signs should be posted where necessary. Now, if you're looking at OSHA's hierarchy of controls, if you can eliminate the hazard, definitely do that first. If you can't do that, engineer it out. So for example, you could install a ventilator to get it out of the environment, and if that doesn't work, use administrative controls like limiting exposure or adding shifts. Personal protective equipment, like a respirator, is your last line of defense and is often used in conjunction with the administrative controls. Now, you might have heard the terms MSDS, or Material Safety Data Sheet, and SDS, which is a safety data sheet, used interchangeably, but there's actually a very key distinction between them. MSDS refers to the older format, while SDS is the updated standardized version. Here's what's changed. In the standardized format, MSDSs varied in structure, making them rather confusing. SDSs now follow a consistent 16-section format under the Globally Harmonized System, or GHS. They're easier to read. SDSs are more organized and user-friendly, as we said. This allows workers to quickly find crucial safety details. And global compliance. SDSs align with the international safety regulations, ensuring consistency across industries and countries. The bottom line is that MSDS are outdated and SDS are the new improved standard. If you are still using MSDSs, it's time to switch to SDSs to stay OSHA compliant and ensure clear, accessible safety information for everyone. Next, we're going to watch a quick video on chemical exposure in the workplace.
Ben was working in the lab without a respirator. He said to Tom, "I'm not feeling well," and started to feel short of breath. Ben thinks it was from the chemical he was working with. Tom asked, "What chemicals have you been working with?" Ben said, Frank told me to use a spray cleaner for the equipment, but I don't know what it was. Tom said, "We need to get you to a safe location, get the SDS, and we'll see what we have to do." Tom moves him to a safe area away from the hazard and tells Ben to sit down while he calls for help and looks up the SDS.
That video shows how quickly a chemical exposure can occur from not knowing what you're working with. So let's just discuss this a little bit further. What did Tom do right? He took immediate action to help Ben. He tried to determine the exact chemical that was used. And Tom realized that in order to help Ben, he needed to locate the SDS for the chemical for next steps. Now, what could Frank have done better? Well, Frank should have been familiar with the chemical prior to using it and explained necessary information to Ben. This includes reviewing the SDS with Ben to learn more information about necessary PPE, proper handling methods, and what to do if there is exposure. So our takeaways from this situation are to always review the SDS before working with a new hazardous material. And if you think it's not safe to do something, stop and ask for help. Now, here's a great question. Can you convert a material safety data sheet into a safety data sheet or write an SDS on your own? And the answer to that is no, not unless you're the product's manufacturer. They are the only responsible party for writing and updating this material. If you are the manufacturer of the product, we recommend that you refer to OSHA's website for guidance on the new SDS 16-section format, but also consult a safety data sheet authoring service to ensure that all compliance needs are met. As an employer or a user of hazardous materials, to obtain a new or updated SDS, contact the manufacturer. These days, most can be found online on the manufacturer's websites, but if you're having trouble finding one in particular or in a different language, contact them directly. Here's another great question. Does every product need a safety data sheet? Not all products require an SDS, but if a chemical poses a potential health or safety risk, an SDS is necessary. Here's a simple way to break it down. Any product that contains hazardous chemicals needs an SDS. A chemical is considered hazardous if it can cause harm through inhalation, skin contact, ingestion, or environmental exposure. Common products that require an SDS, well, these include industrial and workplace chemicals, gases and fuels, oils, lubricants, and automotive products, construction and manufacturing materials, and laboratory and medical chemicals. Consumer products for general use. If a product is sold for household use, like Windex or a standard aerosol air freshener, and is used the same way in the workplace and at home, an SDS may not be required. However, if it is used in large quantities or in an industrial setting, an SDS might be needed. Food products meant for consumption don't need safety data sheets. Drugs and final consumer packaging. Medications in pill form sold in pharmacies do not require an SDS, but bulk raw chemicals used to manufacture them do. So here's the bottom line. If a chemical is hazardous and used in a workplace setting, it's likely to require an SDS. If it's a common household product used in small amounts, an SDS is generally not needed, unless it's being used in an industrial capacity. So where should you maintain your safety data sheets? Great question. To ensure workplace safety and compliance, SDSs should be easily accessible to all employees. Here are some recommended methods for maintaining your company's records. Use a hard copy log. Keeping SDSs in a physical logbook that includes all applicable chemicals used in the workplace ensures quick access during emergencies. Multiple copies or log locations may be needed to provide accessibility to all employees. You can also try a digital SDS system. This is an online database or electronic system that can serve as a primary or backup SDS library. If using an electronic format, make sure that SDSs are readily accessible to all employees during every shift, and that there are no barriers such as passwords, limited computer access, or slow retrieval times that could prevent employees from obtaining the information. By maintaining SDSs in an organized and accessible manner, workplaces can ensure compliance and improve safety for all employees. How long do you need to keep safety data sheets? Well, there's a common misconception that SDSs must be kept for 30 years. This likely stems from OSHA's requirement to retain employee medical records for that duration. The actual requirements are that you only need to keep SDSs for hazardous chemicals currently in use or stored on site. Once a chemical is no longer needed, keeping its SDS is really optional. Now, should you keep old SDSs? Retaining SDSs for discontinued chemicals is not required, but it can be useful for reference, liability, and/or historical exposure tracking. However, removing outdated SDSs can streamline access to current safety information, making it easier for employees to find what they need. So the bottom line here, keep SDSs for all active hazardous chemicals. So as we near the end of today's presentation, we'd like to emphasize the 3 steps to preventing chemical hazards in the workplace. First, identify. As a company, you need someone or a group of people, like a safety committee, to frequently evaluate the workplace for unsafe acts and hazardous conditions. This applies to all topics, not just safety data sheets. We also recommend bringing in a professional to help evaluate the workplace. It always helps to have a fresh set of eyes from someone that is experienced to evaluate hazards thoroughly. Lancaster Safety would be happy to help you with these steps. Next, educate. Train employees on hazardous conditions, protective measures, applicable OSHA regulations. Training can be one-to-one, in person with a group of employees, online, or remotely. There's really no one size that fits all. Lancaster Safety has a nationwide team of safety professionals, and we pride ourselves on offering convenient safety and health training options to meet your company's needs. Lastly, succeed. By following these steps, you'll feel good about preventing accidents, avoiding OSHA fines, reducing workers' comp premiums, and increasing productivity and profitability. So let's do a quick recap of today's presentation. An SDS is a safety data sheet that is like an instruction manual for chemicals. It tells you everything you need to know about a chemical product, what it is, what dangers it might have, and how to use it safely. It has 16 sections. Ensure accessibility. SDSs must be readily available to all employees handling hazardous chemicals. Remember that MSDSs are the old format, while SDSs are new and improved. If you're still using MSDSs, it's time to update your records. Not all products need an SDS, but if a chemical can pose a hazard to health or safety, it must have one. Here's a simple way to break it down. If a chemical product can cause harm through inhalation, skin contact, ingestion, or environmental exposure, OSHA requires an SDS. If it's something you'd find at home and used in small amounts, it likely doesn't, unless it's being used in an industrial way. Review and update SDSs whenever new safety or regulatory information arises. Train employees on how to read and use SDSs to handle chemicals safely. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you're leaving with a better understanding of how SDSs keep you and your teams safe, compliant, and prepared for emergencies. Lancaster Safety can help evaluate your establishment for safety and health hazards and also provide your company with training and written programs. Just give us a call at 888-403-6026. Have a safe day and see you at our next monthly webinar Wednesday.